Hey folks, I'm Conor Gaughan, and welcome to Consensus in Conversation, a podcast where we're talking to the innovators, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who are committed to building successful businesses that also help us build a better world. Got some exciting news to share with you all this week. We recently had the opportunity to take part in the American Clean Power Association's CLEANPOWER 2024 expo in Minneapolis. ACP is an amazing organization that brings together hundreds of the most innovative companies from around the clean energy industry. And their Clean Power Conference offers such a cool view to all that's being done to build a sustainable energy system for America. I came away filled with a renewed energy and optimism that we really can solve our climate and energy challenges. So, what does it have to do with the show? Well, we got to record Consensus in Conversation live from the ACP PowerCast stage. That's right, we have 2 live recordings for you in the coming weeks. One with Alicia Knapp, President and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway Renewables, on energizing rural America. And the other on the energy tax credit market with an old friend of the pod, Alfred Johnson of Crux, who it just so happens recently announced an official ACP partnership for clean energy tax credit transfers. Both conversations were so much fun. I've been dying to get Alicia on the show for ages, and we're hoping we can still get her to come join us for a full interview too. And it was awesome to catch up with Alfred to see the incredible growth and impact they've achieved at Crux in just over a year. To set the stage for that growth, I thought it'd be fun to repost our original conversation with Alfred, recorded just under a year ago, when the transferability for clean energy tax credits had literally just become a thing and Crux was a brand new startup. So here's a bit of what I said in my intro at that time. The clean energy transition received major wins when Congress passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, which appropriate hundreds of billions of dollars in funding to support new clean energy projects. But most of this money is provided in the form of tax breaks, which many of the recipients, often startups, don't have a high enough tax liability to fully benefit from. Luckily, Congress anticipated this problem and is allowing manufacturers to sell those credits to other companies in order to maximize the amount of available capital for their investment. This provision has created a new multi-billion-dollar industry. But as the tax break market is in its infancy, many innovators will have to develop new technologies to help these transactions go smoothly. Alfred Johnson is one of the leaders that has stepped up to the plate. His diverse background spans public service at the U.S. Treasury Department, an MBA from Stanford, time at the nation's leading asset management company, BlackRock, and a foray into the world of technology entrepreneurship. Now at Crux, he's developing the foundational software that creates an online space for organizations to buy and sell these tax credits. All right, so without further ado, here's the previous conversation with Alfred. And join us next week for the sequel, live from the PowerCast stage at Clean Power 2024. All right. So, let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I was born here in Washington, D.C., where we're sitting. I grew up sort of around government and politics. My parents had met on a political campaign and was always really interested in politics. It's not a surprise that I find myself back here in this city 18 years later. But went out to Stanford for undergrad, played football out there, had a great experience. It was sort of the furthest thing from being in DC. And then I came back here after the Obama campaign and then found myself back here in DC working in the Treasury Department during the financial crisis. So found myself as the special assistant to the guy, Lee Sachs, who was running the financial crisis response team for Tim Geithner. It was the darkest days of the crisis. I started the same week that the market bottomed in March of 2009. I was working on the financial stability plan, TARP, the stress tests, all of that sort of thing. That quickly bridged into work on the Recovery Act. So I was working on the clean energy incentives that were part of that bill. It's my first exposure to that, which is very relevant to what we're building here with Crux. I went into the White House and then went back to business school and then did a tour in financial services and tech. So I was at BlackRock working in their financial markets advisory group and then really missed being in small teams. I think I'd been on the campaign and had really loved building small organizations and knew that that was a good fit for me. So then got into tech 2017, started a company called Mobilize, and we sold that company in 2020 to a portfolio company of Insights, and I had the chance to go back into the government mid last year, we had another baby. I wanted to start another company. And then in that period, the IRA passed, and we started looking at the huge number of tax credits that are in that law that are really the principal mechanism of subsidy within that law, and are now building Crux to be the marketplace, software platform, and network to facilitate those transactions of the tax credits.
Awesome. So there's so many interesting things in there to tease out. Let's start back at Stanford. So did you always know you wanted to work in this kind of civic financial space? You majored in political science and government?
Yeah, I was always interested in the ways that the private sector and the government intersected with each other. It was clear to me that neither could exist in isolation, that both were necessary in order to advance society and, make sure that we were developing technology and advancing in the ways that we need to in so many critical categories. And so I was always interested in both.
And it seems like this is a pretty consistent theme in everything that you've done, right? From working on the private sector side of things to working inside the Treasury Department, looking at this intersection of private and public financing.
Yeah, pretty much everything I have done has been at the intersection of at least two of the three of software, financial markets, and the government.
Before we get to some of the actual learnings, and I've got a ton of questions around the trajectory and the job, I'm also curious why the pause to get an MBA? Because that was a decision I was a hard no on. I love school, but it was a hard pass for me.
Yeah.
I think the opportunity cost of time away from being in the workforce, building something fun or interesting. Some days I look back and wish I had given it more consideration. So I'm curious what it was for you that was a yes.
So I mentioned that I found myself working at Treasury in the darkest days of the financial crisis. I was on this financial crisis team that was led by Lee, but it was composed of all these people that had spent really considerable time in financial services in important positions on the private side. And I saw just how effective those people were. It was a moment where the private sector and financial markets were intersecting fundamentally with the government. The government was intervening in the financial markets. We needed to come up with solutions that would stabilize the markets. And that skill set that those people had operating on the other side of the fence allowed them to be just incredible policymakers. And then I went and I worked for Bill Daley when he was the president's chief of staff. And he had his career at the intersection of business and government as well. And I saw a similar theme working for him. And it seemed to me at 25 or whatever I was at the time, I was looking at my friends that had gone directly into the private sector and the skills that they were building at a very sort of fundamental level in doing business, which you don't get in the same way in government. You get other things. And it struck me that if I were to go back to get an MBA, that I would pick up some of those skills and be able to have the same impact that I saw these people having if I came back to government later. What actually ended up happening is that getting an MBA is just a really fun time. Yeah. So I learned some skills along the way, of course, but, picked up a ton of friends who are super dear to me today and I intersect with in my personal and professional life in so many different ways. And so don't regret it at all. Also enabled me to go to BlackRock in a role that I would not have been in position to get absent the MBA. So ended up being a good choice for me.
Good choice indeed. When you think about kind of markets, I think a lot of folks or popular conception is that markets and doing good, social impact, sustainability, that they're incongruent. And I'm curious what your perspective is as someone both now who kind of works in the markets towards positive impact or uses market solutions for positive impact, but just in general, how do you perceive the opportunity for markets to be a part of a system to support or encourage positive change?
Neither the government nor the private sector is sufficient in itself to be able to affect positive change. I think you need market forces to motivate people and to lead them to start businesses and to lead them to grow them. And that leads to, us building new technologies and advancing medicine and providing jobs and all of these things. You also need a government that lays the rules of the road and, creates conditions where markets can be enabled and allowed to flourish, and people are protected, and our air and water is protected, and the climate is protected, and financial services and financial institutions don't get so big that they imperil the economy. And so you need both. You need private markets that do all the things that private markets do and facilitate growth, and you need government to catalyze and set the standards and lay the table for the private sector to do what it does best.
Yeah. I mean, without the support of public sector, you can't guarantee private market efficiencies, I would argue.
I think we're sitting at a really exciting moment in U.S. public policy. I mean, I mentioned these three big pieces of legislation: the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, and the IRA, that collectively are multiple trillions of dollars worth of support to manufacturing policy, industrial policy, the economic transformation of the U.S. energy system, the economic transformation and fundamental transformation of our infrastructure as a country. And I think the government has done something pretty exceptional there in terms of laying the foundation for American competitiveness in the 21st century. And they've done it in a way that catalyzes private sector activity. Back to the prior conversation, right? They've done it through incentives that draw industry back to the United States, that leads people to invest in clean energy infrastructure. And I think it's a really hopeful time right now, because I think all of a sudden the incentives are highly aligned for private companies to build the things that we need to in order to enhance American competitiveness going forward. And, it's not a question of altruism. It's a question of economics. And now the economics are really there on some of these big things that we need to do.
Beyond your public service in your career over the last few years, you've also worked some startups and worked in tech. And I'm curious if you always had the startup bug or when you got it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably got it on the Obama campaign, because what is a campaign? A campaign is a startup where the product is a political campaign and somebody who's running for office. And you do all the things that you do in a startup. You build a team very rapidly. You try to figure out how to make your case to people in a way that they're going to find interesting. You do marketing, and then you convert people into voting. And all of those activities look pretty similar to starting a tech company. In a tech company, you have to come up with the idea. You have to sell it in a way that people are interested in, investors, your customers, and then you have to build it. You have to grow the team and hire excellent people. You have to deliver on the mission that you said that you're going to do. You have to go get more capital and do more of it. And I have found the activity of creating a business out of whole cloth and coming up with the concept and then bringing it into reality to be an enormously creative and affirming activity. And I know, Conor, you do that with Consensus and Conversation. And, there's something beautiful about getting to see ideas come to life and getting to build something that takes on a life of its own with a culture of its own. And, I take very seriously my obligations as a CEO to build an environment that people want to work at and people enjoy and stay and, are able to have the impact that they want to have in their careers and life, because, we don't get that much time on Earth. And so we may as well spend it doing stuff that we enjoy. Yeah.
So you said something there, which is a good segue. You, from a blank page, build fast. In Crux's case, I'm curious where the idea came from.
Yeah, so I left Treasury in April of last year. I wanted to start another company. I particularly wanted to start one with my co-founder from Mobilize, Alan Kramer. I wanted to do it in climate. It struck me that there was no bigger issue, no more important thing that I could be working on than the sustainability and health of our planet as an enabling thing for the sustainability and health of people. So I started by investing with a dear friend of mine who is starting a new investment fund. His name is Ian Samuels, and we were looking at just the most technical climate stuff, different novel battery companies and, really exciting companies that have figured out how to use ammonia as a hydrogen carrier and convert that energy into something that can power ships and, very deeply scientific stuff.
Yeah.
And I like science. I enjoyed it in high school. I, enjoy a good TED Talk from time to time, but I don't know anything about that stuff. Less than nothing.
Right.
And it was fun to sit in the meetings and meet the cool entrepreneurs that were doing things in such creative ways. But I didn't feel like I had any particularly differentiated perspective to add there. And then the IRA passed, and it includes somewhere between 370 billion and $1 trillion of subsidy that is going to go into clean energy and decarbonization. And most of the subsidy that the bill provides, that the law provides, is provided in the form of tax credits. It's not like an obvious thing that the government would incentivize clean energy policy and decarbonization via the tax code. That is a thing that we have found ourselves doing over the last decade. So the IRA creates hundreds of billions of dollars worth of tax credits.
Yep.
The thing about tax credits is they tend to build really diverse constituencies of support around them because there are a lot of people that benefit from their existence, but they're not the most elegant policy mechanism. And in the case of these tax credits, many of them are earned by companies that don't pay enough taxes, don't have enough tax liability to be able to make use of them. So they need to sell them. They need to find some other company that can be their partner and can buy them from them. It wasn't previously possible to sell them. The law did not allow it. And what the IRA does is creates a new mechanism where now the tax credits can be sold directly. And that's really powerful because it provides an opportunity to drive hundreds of billions of dollars worth of capital into these projects. But the market needs to be efficient on the sale of those credits in order to maximize the amount of money that flows to the people that are building these things. And we're building Crux to be the marketplace that enables that efficient transaction and drives hundreds of billions of dollars of capital into the places that it needs to go in order to facilitate the energy transition.
And I want to just distill that to the basics again, because I think that's a really great explanation. But if we were to say, who are the buyers, who are the sellers, and then what are they buying and selling? One more time, let's explain this for folks as if they're five.
Totally. So the sellers are companies that earn tax credits for building renewable energy or decarbonization projects or through the production of energy created by those projects. So they get these tax credits. Many of them don't pay enough taxes to be able to use the tax credits, so they need to find a partner to buy them. The buyers will overwhelmingly be corporations that pay taxes that are interested in advancing their sustainability objectives by buying tax credits. They'll buy the tax credits at a haircut to $1. So you might buy $100 worth of tax credits for $95. The savings is what draws you to the market, and the developer keeps the proceeds of that. So the developer would get the 95 cents that goes into the project, allows them to turn around capital and build more. There are going to be critical intermediaries within those transactions. Financial institutions are going to play a fundamental role making markets in these new tax credits. And Crux is building the software that ties those three parties together, that allows the sellers to list their projects on the platform and manage workflows around it, that allows syndicators and financial institutions to make markets using the software and do that efficiently, and that allows buyers to buy credits and manage the credits after they purchase them.
I think that makes it super clear. And also I think is a great quick elevator pitch for what Crux does kind of in that process. I still want to get back to, it's an incredibly smart, interesting, powerful product. And there was a huge market opportunity for it. Sure, without a doubt. You have the idea and day one, what do you do? What does the actual day one look like when you started Crux?
Well, Conor, as you know, there's sort of day, -30 or whatever when you first start to noodle on an idea, and then it, takes its own form over time, and you talk to a lot of people, and it, gets better. With this particular idea, I remember where I was when I first heard about transferability. I was walking the dog. I was listening to a podcast by Dave Roberts with Jesse Jenkins, and Jesse Jenkins was making the point about the powerful transferability provision that had recently been added to the bill before it was passed. I remember thinking, wow, that is very interesting, that there's going to need to be this new market mechanism that emerges in order for the IRA to be successful. And absent that market mechanism, this money is not going to flow where it needs to go. And that is a mix of a financial markets problem, financial technology and workflow problem, marketplace software problem, and something that relates to the things that the Treasury Department will do. And, as an entrepreneur, you look for things where you are well suited to solve the problem. And then for the next couple months, my wife will tell you, my friends will tell you, I sort of obsessively listen to podcasts. It's good for the form that we are in right now. But I would walk around, walk the dog, and listen to podcasts about tax equity, renewable energy project finance, and all of the aspects around these clean power deals, and just try to get as deep as possible for hours and hours on end and read everything that I could, read the statute, read legal summaries, really try to understand this deeply. And probably emerged from that deep hole of research towards the winter of 2022 and formed the company shortly after that, right after it became legal to transact these credits.
And we're still in the early days of, we're just now starting to see, spades hit the ground on some of these. And certainly there's a lot that have been announced. I feel like every day you'll see a new plant being announced in, bringing jobs and clean energy capacity to new markets. Being as early on as it is, what does your average day look like?
So this market is going really fast. It became legal to transact credits 4 months and 24 days ago, sitting here on May 24th. There are a lot of projects that were going into the ground already. And so there's a lot of development that is already happening here in 2023. Even more of it is planned for 2024. And so right now, we're spending a ton of time with developers that are looking to sell their credits, helping them to find the market and to meet buyers of them. We're spending a lot of time with tax directors and CFOs of companies that are interested in participating in this new market and have a lot of questions about how it's going to function. I am spending a lot of time trying to anticipate and understand what the rules that define this new market are going to be. The IRS is going to put out some really important guidance on this in the next couple of weeks here, we anticipate. And that will really be the formal starting gun on what is going to end up becoming a multi-$100 billion market. So we're building very quickly in anticipation of that. We built the team to 8 this month, really excited about the people that have joined. We are very rapidly building the product. We are showing it to financial institutions that will play that role of syndicator within the market and understanding what their necessary features of the product are going to be. And, just really trying to build the software to enable the market to take the form that it needs to in order to drive hundreds of billions of dollars into these projects.
So this is your second techie startup. And I'm curious, what are the differences in the early days of Mobilize versus the early days of this? How does this feel different?
I think it's kind of remarkable that anybody is successful the first time you start a company. When I go back to the person that I was and really what I knew about starting a company in 2017 when we started Mobilize, I knew nothing.
Yeah.
Like I knew like hard zero. And you make so many mistakes in the way that you think about capitalizing the company and hiring and strategy, and you just learn all those things as you go. So I'm very grateful to be going around for the second time. I'm very grateful to be doing it with my friend and second time co-founder, Alan. We just have a ton of capacity and shared experience from having done it one time that allows us to go really quickly. We are actually bringing on a number of colleagues that we have worked with previously at Mobilize. So in the early team of 8, 4 will come from that company. Some have since left and are rejoining us. And that gives us the capacity to move even faster. So, I think it's more about channeling the learnings from that first experience into the way that we are operating the new business and, really trying to go extremely fast in this market that is developing so quickly and needs to be efficient in order to achieve the objectives that we all have and facilitate the energy transition.
When you think about where you're positioning yourself in the marketplace versus others, is anyone else looking at this? Are there others that are kind of trying to build this as quickly? No one could have started before y'all, but who else is kind of looking at this opportunity? And how would you kind of explain your differentiation?
Yeah, so it's not a secret, unfortunately, that the government just created a new multi-$100 billion asset class. There are several other people that have that same insight, including large financial institutions who are trying to figure out how they're going to adjust their businesses.
Yep.
So I think we benefit from the fact that there is a lot of market here. There's a lot of need, right? There's going to be a ton of these credits that are transacted on an annual basis, and there need to be thousands of buyers of the credits in the space in order to clear the market. Conor, just to put that in very clear terms, the market is anticipated to get to something on the order of $100 billion in annual transactions. Total corporate taxes paid by all U.S. corporations in the same year that the market is expected to reach that number is about $500 billion. And that's a big market. So there will be other players that are in it. There are lots of other people that are doing creative things. I know that there are smart people that are thinking about this. Our particular angle here is to really be the software layer that facilitates the transactions at scale. We don't want to do advisory services. We don't want to be the facilitator of the transactions apart from providing the software that brings the right people to the table, makes it much more efficient, allows more transactions to happen in a larger market. And we particularly see a very powerful role for the intermediaries to play in that market in order to facilitate the size and liquidity that need to exist.
Taking a step back, I'm curious how powerful you think this move and tax credits and the transferability of them is. When we look at the trajectory of clean energy in America and innovation and manufacturing, and how pivotal is this moment in time? How pivotal is this decision to build a tax credit and a system that makes a market out of them? Like, where does this sit in the arc of this narrative?
I think it sits alongside some of the most influential government policy choices that have ever been made by the country, by the US government. The quantum of subsidy that is going into clean energy and decarbonization. I mean, we're talking about $1 trillion plus if you trust Goldman's estimates on how much is going to be deployed here. Goldman actually estimates that $3 trillion will be invested in clean power and decarbonization over the next 10 years. That is unbelievably catalytic to the energy transition. It means that the world that we are living in 10 years from now looks dramatically different in terms of the composition of energy sources that are powering the computers that we're using to talk right now, the phones, the lights that are over our heads. Everything is going to change, and it couldn't come soon enough, right? Because we are in a dramatic moment in the climate and the health of the planet. And this is the sort of thing that gives us a chance to bend the curve back to where it needs to be. But it requires all of us. It requires the private sector. It requires government. It requires builders on both sides. And we need to do it really fast.
Yeah. Your mission statement as an organization has a few phrases that I think are really interesting. And I'm wondering if you would talk to us about your mission statement and why you chose some of the words you chose and how that came to be.
So we exist to make sustainable finance more efficient and interconnected. So that the key terms there are sustainable finance, efficient, and interconnected. Sustainable finance, we mean to be the most inclusive term to cover clean power, decarbonization, and advanced manufacturing to enable the energy transition. Efficient, it's just necessary that if the government is going to be deploying all of these resources into this space with the urgency that we have around this problem, that those resources be well spent and that they not be wasted and leaked to a bunch of intermediaries within transactions. The more efficient we can all be in the time that we are spending on building these projects and the finance that is going into those projects, the more projects get built, and we urgently need that. Interconnected, the market currently has a lot of silos. There are large banks that provide what is known as tax equity financing into projects, mostly larger projects. And those silos aren't going to be able to expand to the size that they need to reach in order to facilitate hundreds of billions of dollars worth of transactions. So we need many more counterparties exchanging with many more counterparties. And if we do that, and there's interconnection among the various people that are doing the most critical building and financing of projects, then we're going to build more projects and we're going to do it more quickly.
When you think about the folks you're doing it with and your customer base, I'm actually just struck by the notion, and listening to you talk, it like reminds me of when I was a banker and people were talking about sale leasebacks of satellites for satellite TV companies, or kind of some esoteric financial products that helped deliver capital in a new, creative way to corporations. And I'm wondering, I'm picturing, life explaining this and selling this product to financial services organizations as the syndicators, the big CFOs, and how different that those two audiences are vis-a-vis working on a campaign. And I'm just curious, culturally, like, how does that feel, or what would you describe as kind of the cultural juxtaposition of, your career trajectory?
It's interesting. A lot of the people that I worked with in the administration, both administrations, have gone on to careers in sustainability. And the financial institutions are disproportionately hiring people who get it, that get all sides of this problem. And, I find myself often impressed with the capability and facility of the people that I am talking to that are moving these very large organizations in the direction of a changing business. And, again, that doesn't have to be motivated by some altruistic impulse. It can be supported by one. But now, with the advent of the IRA, the passage of the IRA, this is big business, right? This is big capital going into big projects and moving the needle on the numbers of tons of carbon that are consumed by this country on an annual basis. And, I find that my experience in advocacy, my experience working on campaigns, my experience building marketplace software, my experience in financial markets and at the Treasury Department equip me to have those conversations and, interact with people across a number of different parameters here. And that interdisciplinary sort of multimodal nature of the problem, I think, requires people to look at it from different perspectives. And those different perspectives are valuable.
Yeah. I've had a few conversations and interviews with ESG folks, or even sustainability officers. And as they talk about ESG, it's apparent that for many in the financial services, these are not altruistic. These are capitalist decisions. These are decisions rooted in risk mitigation and long-term return maximization. I suspect that you run into that same sort of reality that with all parties to these transactions.
I think we all wear multiple hats a lot of the time. People really care about and are viscerally relating to observed changes in the climate and the weather, right? I'd spent a lot of time in the American West. I went to college and business school in California. When I went to college, we would start preseason for football in the beginning of August every year. I don't remember a single practice being canceled because of smoke. Now, 15 years later, in August, you're lucky when it's a clear day. And I think people are increasingly observing that reality in their lives. So yeah, they care about this stuff. It's influencing their decisions. It's observable. And people in a capitalistic society want to make money. And they work for organizations that are responsible to their shareholders. And that's good too, because that leads those companies to invest in projects that are going to be effective and be productive, and that's great. And so I think in these markets and more broadly for people right now, we're wearing both of those hats at the same time. And that's good because that will push us from both perspectives to make the change that we need to at this urgent moment for the planet.
Yeah. How do you, as an organization and individually, think about aligning those hats? Think about aligning your desire to do good in the world with the necessity and desire to make money as a company. You guys have aligned them perfectly. When you make money, you're doing good in the world. But I'm curious how you think about that alignment.
I guess for me, I've always found work more interesting when work is tied to things I care about. In the parts of my career where I was working, but the thing didn't matter, right? Like I was replaceable, or the organization that I was serving just was meeting the financial objective and, wasn't thinking about other objectives. I just found it less interesting. You can do the work, but it's less interesting. And I have found that when I'm able to align those things, then I'm much happier in the work that I do, and more joyful in the work that I do, and more convicted in the work that I do. And that helps me bring that to every interaction that I have, helps me grow the team with conviction, helps me raise money with conviction. And that's really helpful, right? Like believing the thing that you're selling is really helpful to being able to do a good job of it. So I really try to wear both hats at the same time as much as I can. And in part also because I am aware at 37, which is my current age with 2 kids, that I'm really lucky to be, in the middle of my life, hopefully on the front 9 of that middle, but I'm not on the third hole. And I want to make sure that I am spending my time doing the things that are fun, that are joyful, and that make a difference.
Yeah. I feel like it matches the general zeitgeist of where we are as a country right now, for many, many people. And I'm curious, do you have any advice for those who are fortunate enough to be younger than we are and are looking for their first job, or looking to start something, and take a giant risk at coming out of school, that they want to find that alignment? Any advice on how?
I think you have to ask yourself the question, why, before you can answer the question, how. And everybody has a different why. Why do you get up in the morning? Why do you care about some things and not others? What motivates you? And I think if you answer those questions, then the what becomes a lot more apparent and the how becomes a lot more apparent. And it's hard to really focus on the why because it's easy to be incrementalist, right? It's easy to say, I have this job that is the right thing that I'm supposed to do because I majored in this thing or that thing and just do it. And, I think the advice, and I always, hesitate to generically give advice, but the suggestion that I would have is take an extra moment thinking about the why, because that'll lead you to the right place.
Yeah. I also was one of those kids that just followed the path. And at some point, 10 years in to being an investment banker, I looked at my life and thought, what did I just do? Where did the time go? And so I think it's wise advice to take a minute and reflect. Speaking of reflections, as you reflect on your life, what do you hope your legacy will be?
Oof, what a good question. I feel like the luckiest person in the world to have the family that I have. I am married to an amazing person. We have two wonderful, creative, interesting, funny sons. They're 4 and 1. I hope that my legacy is to be a present and connected husband and father. I hope that I am able to channel the opportunity that I have, whatever experiences and talent that I may have, into doing things that make a difference for a lot of people on very human things, right? Like on the sorts of things that impact the daily well-being of a lot of people. And that's what led me to climate. That's what led me to this problem. Because if we don't deal with it, if we don't figure out how to reverse the course and put the economy on the right footing to be able to grow as a society and civilization in the context of a healthy, stable planet, then I think things get really weird. And I think things get really hard. And I care about that for my kids, and I care about that for all kids. And I hope that I am able to make a big difference there.
You talk about really weird and really hard. I would posit, some days we already see that, right? If you look at the last few years, I was talking with a data scientist, said there's this reality that over the last few years, we've seen more black swan events that have broken predictive analytics models in a variety of spaces and types than the entire generation before us had ever seen. And we saw all of them, we saw 5 or 6 black swan events in the last few years. And, I think the consequence of that is a collective uncertainty, is a collective paralysis, thinking that this is all too big and too much and too hard and requires systemic change, and that's just not possible. And we can't even agree to increase our own credit limit, let alone deploy the solutions that are going to be required for this massive global change. How do you defeat that defeatism? Because you're doing it every day by virtue of your job, by virtue of building this company. Like that is an inherent act, I think, of hopefulness and of optimism and an affront to the defeatism. But how would you inspire others to do that?
I think it is easy for people to think linearly, right? To expect that tomorrow will be like today. And there's a certain amount of comfort that comes with that. I think it is hard for people to think when the rate of change is exponential and things are dramatically different tomorrow than they were today. And change is really hard, right? And when change happens really quickly, it can feel really unsettling. And it's easy to look around the world and see war and pandemics and the deteriorating climate and feel distressed and defeated. I am also aware that, I'm currently sitting in the spare bedroom yelling into a metal and plastic device that is somehow communicating my image and my voice to you via the air. And that wasn't possible when you and I were born, right? And we like forget just how dramatically amazing that is, that technology has enabled us to interact with each other in these totally different ways that opens up all kinds of new opportunities on information and innovation that we didn't have available to us before. And I think the kinds of advances that we are observing in artificial intelligence are similarly exponential and similarly unsettling, but also potentially optimistic. And I think optimism requires looking at that rate of change and trying to figure out the ways that it can be channeled to make our existence better and our well-being enhanced. And I think that change has within it the potential to do that, but we need to harness it, and we need to invest in the things that are going to change things for a lot of people.
Okay, so that was our conversation with Alfred Johnson of Crux. You can find out more about Crux on their website, cruxclimate.com, and we'll have all the links for you to connect with them on socials in the show notes. Speaking of show notes, check out the episode on Spotify for a brand new Q&A this week. We love seeing your answers to those, so definitely take a look and fill it out. As always, you can email us at cic@consensus-digital.com. That's cic@consensus-digital.com, or you can message me on LinkedIn and Threads at CKGONE. Send us your questions, comments, ideas for future guests. We'd love to get the feedback. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us to grow our reach and add new people to the conversation and continue bringing you more awesome talks with the business leaders you want to hear from. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back next week with Alfred Johnson live from ACP 2024.